I'm Tom Baker, and here on the Chasing Cars channel, we spend a lot of our time talking about hybrid mid-size SUVs, and this is not one of those. It is a mid-size SUV, but this Volkswagen Tiguan 162 TSI is more of a full-throated turbo petrol SUV for people that value driving dynamics more than they value fuel economy. And if you're one of those people, then you're going to want to keep watching, because this is still one of the very best driving SUVs on the market, if you can wait for one, because this proper 162 TSI R-Line spec has wait times extending past 12 months. Now, if you're a subscriber, you'll know that Volkswagen has done various things to try and get Tiguans in buyers' hands more quickly, mainly by dropping luxury and convenience equipment like in cars, including the 162 TSI monochrome, which is about $4 cheaper than this car, but doesn't have power seats, doesn't have a power tailgate, doesn't have leather, that sort of thing. So should you wait for the proper full spec? I'm going to explain my opinion on that point in today's video. I'll also take you around the Tiguan 162 TSI, inside, into the back seat and boot. We'll talk about the running costs, and then we'll go for a drive to see whether in 2023, the Tiguan 162 TSI is still a great SUV to buy if you really care about driving. But before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Outside, I would say the Tiguan is still one of the most handsome mid-size SUVs, although it looks quite different between the short wheelbase or normal wheelbase version, which is what we're sitting in here, and the long wheelbase all space that gives you a third row of seats, a very small third row of seats, and a bigger boot. So there's two sizes for you to consider. Now, jumping into the cabin, it is one of the more dated Volkswagens in terms of interior design, but happily it means that there's more old school controls for things which lots of people will prefer, including separate climate controls down here. Even though they are touch driven, you don't have to dig through the touch screen, and all the sliders are illuminated, which I know is something a lot of people complain about when it comes to the Mark 8 Golf. Unfortunately, in the facelift, the Tiguan 162 TSI R-Line picked up the Mark 8 Golf's touch-sensitive illuminated controls up here on the steering wheel. We know these will be disappearing. The Volkswagen head boss globally has already committed to scrapping those, which is good because they are difficult to use. Now over here, we've got a 9-inch touchscreen. It's got wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and it works well. It's snappy, it's relatively quick. Though the CarPlay connection was a bit spotty in this car, it might just be down to this particular car, however. We've also got the optional Harman Kardon stereo in this vehicle, which sounds pretty good, although a bit of a secret to the Tiguan is that the standard non-premium stereo sounds really good in this car, so you don't actually have to go for the option. Looking forward, we've got a digital instrument cluster as well, with some level of customization. That's definitely a nice feature to have. And the steering wheel itself, which is perforated here and has paddle shifters, feels expensive in the hands, as does the leather shifter down here, where you can also change your drive modes and a few other settings too. Now, this car doesn't have wireless charging, which is a bit of a surprise, though the secret shame of wireless charging is that it almost never actually works. Instead, we've got two USB-C ports down here to charge your phone much more reliably. And when it comes to materials and plushness, it's not bad on the dash and doors. A bit scratchy down here where my leg tends to rest. A CX-5 feels a bit more opulent and plush inside. But one really good point about the Tiguan is that the seats are ergonomic. They're a bit harder than in some cars, but on a long drive, you're going to prefer that because you get out of the Tiguan feeling refreshed. But if you go for the R-Line, you can only get this black interior, black seats, black dash, black headliner, and it's pretty hot in summer, like right now. There's no seat cooling with the R-Line. So my recommendation would be to go for the 162 TSI Elegance model, which lets you option a much lighter, brighter, cooler grey interior, and it also has standard seat coolers, so you'll be much cooler and more refreshed in the Australian summer. Now, the Tiguan is a real TARDIS because it's actually one of the smallest cars in its segment. It's only just over 4,500 millimeters long, which is super easy to park, and yet the interior is incredibly spacious. Volkswagen are really good at packaging, and this car is a major flex of that capability. So this seat is in my driving position. I'm 6 feet tall, and look at the amount of room I've got in the back of this car. It's honestly pretty incredible. You know, I like to nerd out about this stuff. So I've got headroom for days, legroom, acres of it, and tow room is exceptional, even with the driver's seat flat on the deck. You can get a third person in the center, even though there is a bit of a tunnel here for the four-wheel drive system. We've got air vents, separate climate zone, USB-C, 12 volt, pockets aplenty in the back seats, although One thing that did make me sad was that the pre-facelift version of this car had really cool airline style tray tables on the backs of the seats. You can't get that anymore unless you go for a Caddy, and let's face it, not many people want to drive a Caddy for their family. There are harsh materials though here in the back, but it partially redeems itself with this center armrest and the fact the back seats slide and they also recline, so it's super flexible back here. When the Tiguan came in for its facelift last year, Volkswagen tidied up the rear end of this SUV, got rid of some badging, shifted the Tiguan badge to the middle. It no longer says 2.0 TSI, so instead for the 162 TSI, you need to look for these fake quad exhaust pipes instead. But you do get a 4Motion badge because this car has all-wheel drive. It also has a power tailgate, unlike the monochrome version, which has a manual tailgate. That opens up, it reveals a boot that measures up to 615 litres. That's only if you push that second row all the way forward. But either way, it is a nice spacious boot. It's not as big as the All-Space, especially the All-Space Adventure that Kurt reviewed on the channel recently, but you'll get plenty of stuff in here. You've also got remote releases to drop those seat backs, you've got bag hooks, you've got boxes off to the left and right of this hard boot floor, and underneath that, there's a temporary space saver spare as well, plus a button here to close the boot, but there isn't a corresponding button to also lock the car. The Tiguan isn't the SUV to buy if you want the cheapest running costs, and that starts with servicing. You can save money by buying an upfront Volkswagen Care plan for the Tiguan, but it's still far more expensive to service than many other cars in its class. A 5-year, 75,000 kilometer care plan costs $3,200 for this car. That still averages out at over $600 a year to service the Tiguan, which is relatively steep. Though if you buy the diesel, it's a little bit cheaper actually at around $2,800 for 5 years. Now, a similar story applies to the fuel consumption, which is about 11 or 12 litres per 100 Ks in the real world. With the 162 TSI, it requires premium petrol and it's going to cost you over $3,000 a year in fuel costs if you do 15,000 kilometers per year. Now, by contrast, the diesel is far more efficient. It uses about 7 litres per 100 Ks or a little less. But of course, not everybody wants to buy a diesel right now. So if you're looking for a Tiguan with low ongoing costs, the forthcoming plug-in hybrid could very well be the car for you. Now, in terms of insurance, everybody's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live and your driving history. And lastly, the Tiguan is covered by Volkswagen's 5-year unlimited kilometer warranty. All right, so let's go for a drive in the Tiguan 162 TSI R-Line, because in my opinion, if you're buying this car, you're kind of doing it because you like how it drives. The Tiguan is practical, it's good looking, and it has quite a lot of nice equipment, but a lot of other mid-size SUVs have kind of caught up to Volkswagen's packaging advantage. If not entirely, they're definitely getting close. So these days, for 2023, it's really the way the Tiguan drives that sets it apart from the many other mid-size SUVs in this segment. There's so many of them on offer. And as we found out about a year ago when we published our mid-size SUV mega test, the Tiguan has a chassis that no other mid-size SUV has yet been able to challenge at this price point. It can carry so much speed on a great road, far beyond what most family buyers would ever require of it. You can tell that the same sort of people that developed Golf GTIs were tasked with setting up this car, and that's one of the reasons why the Tiguan feels very satisfying from behind the wheel. And if you're a keen driver and you now need a family-sized car, or you just appreciate a vehicle that manages to ride comfortably while also providing good steering and nice performance, then I think you'll be satisfied with the Tiguan. If you don't really care about that stuff, then there are other cars in this segment that are going to be cheaper to buy and service than this car. But it's all worth it if you do care about driving dynamics. So let's start with the engine. There's actually 5 different engines available with the Tiguan in Australia, all the way from an entry-level 1.4 litre turbo front-wheel drive car right through to the rip-snorting Tiguan R with its 235 kilowatt motor to match the Golf R. But this one is kind of a sweet spot. The 162 TSI was billed as having the Golf GTI engine when it came out. Of course, that car now has more power, but it's still a good sort of level. 162 kilowatts of power and 350 Newton meters of torque, standard all-wheel drive, and a 7-speed heavy-duty wet clutch DSG automatic transmission. And out in the real world, it offers a nice brisk sense of pace, whether you're driving for sport and revving it right out like this, or if you're just jumping into gaps in traffic and commuting with a little bit more verve than normal. It's not an out-and-out sports SUV, it's just got a good amount of power to get the job done, and I'll put our independent 0 to 100 and 100 to 0 acceleration and braking tests on the screen here now. The engine and gearbox partnership is generally a pretty nice one. Volkswagen has refined its DSG autos, and while there's still occasionally a bit of hesitation off the mark in the Tiguan 162 TSI, it's certainly nowhere near as rough as these transmissions once were. And once you do have some speed on board, it's a really seamless and sporty transmission to work with. And the brakes have great feel too and deliver strong stopping power. But for me, it's all about that chassis I was mentioning before, because the Tiguan has a lovely light motor over the front axle and it offers really keen turn-in. The chassis is super well sorted, there's loads of mechanical grip, and the tires are sticky too, so it's a really fun SUV to drive. It doesn't have to be that just because you've needed to upgrade to a bigger car to carry around prams and baby seats and all that stuff, that you have to resign yourself to driving a boring SUV, because this isn't one of them. It's actually surprisingly chuckable, and whether just on your normal roads or you finally, you find a back road and you've got some time without kids in the car, you can get stuck into the Tiguan, and it really does reward you for doing so. It's quite a lovely, accomplished, fun SUV. And the ride is like quite uncanny. Despite having such large wheels, there's no harshness or chop to the ride. It's plush, it's well sorted. There's a little lateral shimmy through the car in the comfort mode at times, but chuck it in normal and you get a really good blend of comfort and compliance. You probably won't need the sport damping though, as it starts to get a little bit stiffer. And when it comes to safety, we have Volkswagen's IQ Assist suite. The adaptive cruise is smooth, the lane keeping is well sorted, and we have reversing AEB, forwards AEB, and a 360-degree camera, though the resolution on that is pretty bad, and I'd like to see that get an upgrade soon. So that's my opinion of the 2023 Volkswagen Tiguan 162 TSI R-Line. What a mouthful. You do have to wait for this car, and for some buyers that's not going to be convenient, particularly if you need a new SUV now. If you're one of those people and you've already fallen in love with the Tiguan and this engine, then you're going to want to go for the monochrome. You lose some cool features, but they're in stock, so you're going to be able to get your hands on one immediately. If, however, you're a bit of a forward planner, you're looking at your lease coming up in 18 months and wondering, what am I going to replace my car with? Well, you could put an order in for one of these, and then about the time your lease is up, you'll find a shiny Tiguan R-Line on your driveway with all the features, the power seats, the power tailgate, the power everything really. So it really depends what bucket you fall into. Of course, if you don't fall into either bucket and you want a hybrid, you're going to want to look at cars like the RAV4, the X-Trail, or even think about the upcoming Tiguan plug-in hybrid, which should be quite interesting. Also consider the Elegance model if you want a light interior, which I definitely would. Now I'm keen to know your opinions, so let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.